Story 1.
35 years in construction. I've been renovating homes in Texas for close to 35 years now. I've rebuilt farmhouses that were leaning like tired old men and restored ranch homes that hadn't seen fresh paint since the 70s. Most jobs follow the same rhythm: walk the property, assess the damage, draft a plan, bring it back to life. Wood rots, pipes burst, foundations settle. You fix what's broken and move on. After a while, they start to blur together. But there's one job I never managed to file away with the rest. It started in March of 1994 with a phone call from a man who'd just purchased a neglected property about 6 miles outside Laredo. The place had been sitting vacant for years. He needed everything: foundation stabilization, framing reinforcement, new roofing, full utility overhaul, insulation, flooring, permits pulled and approved. It was the kind of contract that would keep a crew busy 3 to 6 months and run somewhere north of $75,000, maybe more. I accepted without hesitation. Big projects were my specialty. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if that confidence is what blinded me to the first sign that something wasn't right. The wrong key. I drove out there the following Monday just after sunrise. The property sat off a dirt road that kicked up fine red dust behind my truck. Mesquite trees, dry grass, nothing but open land in every direction. The house itself looked tired but salvageable. I'd seen worse. I parked, grabbed the ring of keys the owner had handed me that Friday, and walked up to the front door. The key didn't fit. I tried it again, slower this time, turning it gently in case the lock was just stiff from neglect. Nothing. I checked the tag, made sure I wasn't mixing it up with another job. Same result. It wasn't a big deal. Owners mix up keys all the time. I left him a calm voicemail and figured I'd use the time to walk the perimeter. I'd barely made it around the side of the house when a black SUV came past down the dirt road. It stopped a little too abruptly behind my truck. A man in a security uniform stepped out and asked if I had authorization to be on the property. I explained the contract. He softened, then said no one was allowed inside until safety inspectors cleared it. He showed me paperwork with the owner's name on it. It all looked official. Still, as I drove back toward town, something about that encounter didn't sit quite right. No security guard. The owner called me back around lunchtime. I expected an apology about the key and maybe a laugh about crossed wires with some private contractor. Instead, he sounded irritated. "I gave you the right key," he said. "And what inspectors are you talking about?" I told them about the man in the security uniform, the SUV, the paperwork with his name on it. There was a long pause. "I didn't hire any security," he said finally. "And I don't know anything about inspections." That was the moment my irritation turned into something else. I'd worked enough vacant properties to recognize the signs. Sometimes people used empty houses for things they didn't want seen. I told him, as calmly as I could, that there might be activity on his land he wasn't aware of. He exhaled slowly and asked if I could meet him there the next morning with a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy. We regrouped just after 8. The locksmith popped the door in under a minute. The deputy went in first. The smell hit me before anything else. Not decay, just stale air. The house was run down, same as before, but parts of it were clean. The hallway floor looked recently swept. One of the ground floor rooms had been cleared out entirely. In the center of that room sat a metal chair bolted directly into the concrete slab. In the corner were chains, not neatly stored, just piled. The deputy stepped back, keyed his radio, and called it in. That was when the air in the house shifted from suspicious to something heavier. We hadn't even gone upstairs yet. The shower? The deputy told us to stay behind him as we moved toward the staircase. The steps creaked under our weight, and the house felt smaller the higher we climbed. Upstairs, the air was warmer, thick and unmoving. The bathroom door stood half open. At first glance, it looked ordinary tub on the left, shower stall in the far corner. But when the deputy stepped inside, he stopped short. I leaned just enough to see past his shoulder. The shower walls had been reinforced with concrete slabs, not tiled, not repaired, reinforced. The slabs were uneven, poured thick and rough, like someone had layered them in a hurry but with purpose. And across that gray surface were shallow divots. circular impressions, clustered in one section about chest height. They weren't holes all the way through, but they didn't need to be. The deputy didn't say what we were all thinking. He just keyed his radio again and asked for additional units. Standing there, I understood something without needing it explained. The chair downstairs, the chains, the reinforced shower, the cleaning, this wasn't vandalism, it wasn't squatters. It was controlled, deliberate, the kind of place designed so noise wouldn't travel and mess wouldn't spread. Crime scene techs combed that house for days. They pulled up floorboards, scraped drains, dug craters across the property. But whoever had used that place had been careful. Everything scrubbed, everything removed. No bodies, no prints, no evidence, just absence. Eventually, the property was released back to the owner. Months passed, and somehow I found myself returning to finish the job. They were just here when the deputies finally cleared the property. The owner asked to meet me before work resumed. We stood out by the fence line while my crew waited in their trucks. He looked thinner than he had the first time we'd met. "They think whoever was using it left the day you showed up," he said quietly. "Maybe when you tried the door." The idea settled in slowly. The key that wouldn't turn. The SUV arriving almost too fast. The paperwork ready to go. If I arrived an hour earlier, stayed longer, there's no telling who I might have met inside that house. The police never found anyone. No missing persons tied to it. No charges filed. The place had been scrubbed too clean and abandoned too quickly. We went ahead with the renovation, new plumbing, new drywall, fresh tile in that bathroom. I replaced the shower entirely, tore out every inch of concrete. By the time we finished, the house looked like any other modest ranch property on the market. It sold within 3 months. I've worked on hundreds of homes since then. Bigger ones, more complicated ones. Fires, floods, foundation collapses. But none of them carried that same quiet weight. What bothers me isn't what I saw. It's how close I was to something I didn't see at all. You can rebuild walls. You can pour new concrete. You can repaint and reseal and make a place look brand new. But some places don't empty out when you clean them. Story 2. When I wore the badge before I ever sat behind a desk or carried retirement papers in my back pocket, I wore a Texas Ranger badge for nearly 2 decades. In that time, I saw enough violence to understand how quickly a life can turn and how quietly it can end. You learn to separate yourself from it. You have to. Most cases become paperwork once they're closed. But one never quite did. It was the early 80s. I was still young enough to think experience could shield you from certain things. My partner and I were assigned to look into a missing persons report involving a man named Billy Staton and his fiancée, Letitia Castro. They'd been gone several days. The last confirmed place anyone saw them was outside the home of Billy's ex-wife and her new husband, Paul Wolf. Custody exchanges can get tense. We'd responded to enough of them to know that arguments sometimes escalate. But disappearances like this, both adults gone without a trace, don't happen by accident. When we pulled up to Wolf's house, I wasn't expecting a confession. I was expecting nerves. What we got instead was something rehearsed. The lie Paul Wolf met us at the door like he'd been expecting company. Calm. Polite. Too steady for a man whose wife's ex-husband had supposedly vanished after a custody exchange. He told us Billy and Letitia hadn't been by in nearly a week. Said if they'd shown up, he would have called it in himself. Claimed he had no idea where they'd gone and suggested maybe they'd skipped town. The problem was, we already had statements placing Billy's truck in Wolf's driveway 3 days prior. Neighbors had seen it. One even remembered hearing raised voices. When we pressed him on that, his story shifted. Yes, Billy had come by. Yes, there'd been an argument. Billy got aggressive, he said. Started yelling at his daughter. Claimed he had to step in to protect his family. Told us Billy attacked him first. According to Wolf, he grabbed an iron bar during the struggle. Said he blacked out after striking Billy. When he came to, both Billy and Letitia were dead. He described panic. Said he loaded their bodies into his truck and drove them to a nearby river. Claimed he dumped them there out of fear. It was an ugly story, but self-defense isn't unheard of. Still, something about the way he told it felt assembled rather than remembered. We placed him under arrest and followed the directions he gave us to the riverbank. If he was lying, We were about to find out. The river ran low that time of year, more mud than current. We followed Wolf's directions down a narrow dirt track until it ended in a clearing near the bank. The smell reached us before the water did. They weren't hard to find. Billy Staton and Letitia Castro had drifted only a short distance before getting tangled in brush near the shoreline. The water had bloated them, softened the edges of what had been done, but not enough to hide it. Letitia had a single gunshot wound to the head, close range, clean entry. No iron bar could explain that. Billy showed blunt force trauma, consistent with Wolf's story, but it didn't account for the second weapon. As we secured the scene and began the slow process of recovery, one of the deputies called me over. Billy's shirt pocket felt heavier than it should have. Inside was a small cassette recorder, the kind you could slip into a jacket and forget about. It was waterlogged, mud-streaked, but intact. That changed everything. If Wolf had told the truth, the tape would confirm it. If he hadn't, it would say so in a way no interrogation ever could. We bagged it carefully. Whatever was on that recording was about to speak for the dead. Hearing a man die back then, restoring a tape pulled from river water, wasn't something we could handle locally. We sent it to the FBI lab in Washington, sealed inside a jar of the same muddy water it had been recovered from. They told us drying it out would have destroyed it. A couple of weeks later, we received a working copy. The audio wasn't perfect. There was distortion, the faint warble of damaged tape, but the voices were clear enough. Billy's came first, calm, asking his daughter to come with him. She started crying. Not terrified, just upset, like any tired child caught between parents. There was no aggression in his tone, no threats. Then Paul Wolf's voice cut in, sharper, angrier. You could hear the scuffle begin, a struggle, something heavy striking flesh, once, twice. Then a woman's voice, Wolf's wife. Get him, she shouted. Hurry up and get him. Another blow. A crash. The sound of Letitia trying to move away. The front door opening. A gunshot. And then it happened. A low, guttural sound from Billy. Not a scream. Not words. Just a groan pulled from somewhere deep inside him. I had seen men die before. Gunshots. Stabbings. Wrecks on rural highways. You arrive after the fact. You document what's left. But hearing the moment a life breaks, that stays different. The tape didn't leave room for interpretation. It stripped Wolf's story down to what it was. We moved forward with charges. The case was airtight. But that sound didn't close when the file did. The sound that stayed the tape did what evidence is supposed to do. It stripped away the story and left only what happened. Wolf's claim of self-defense unraveled under the weight of it. The recording placed him as the aggressor, his wife urging him on, another man helping clean up what they'd done. Charges expanded. Glenn Henderson, the neighbor who'd assisted with disposal, eventually confessed. Trials followed. Convictions stuck. On paper, it was a solid case. 3 people held accountable. A family given answers. Another entry in the archive of crime solved. But cases don't always end where the paperwork does. I retired years later. Packed away the badge, the case files, the photographs. Most of the things I saw faded with time. Faces blur. Details soften. You learn to live with that. What never softened was that sound. Not the shouting. Not the scrambling. The groan. It comes back some nights without warning. Not loud. Just clear enough to recognize. A man realizing he isn't going to get up again. I've stood over plenty of bodies in my life. Death is something you witness in this line of work. But hearing it unfold, second by second, knowing you're listening to the exact moment someone loses his place in the world, that's different. You can close a case. You can't close the sound. Story 3. The cartel job Vincent disappeared for a few months after that credit union job. When he called TJ again, he wasn't talking about gas stations or small town vaults. He said he'd found something that would let us walk away for good. We met him at a diner off the highway. He'd been down in Mexico, he said, watching routes, timing movements. Two white trucks carrying cash across a rural corridor, controlled by people who didn't report losses to the police. Cartel money. Even saying it out loud felt like swallowing glass. I told him it was suicide. He countered with numbers. Enough to retire twice over. Enough to vanish. Said the Sinaloa boys were busy fighting their own war and wouldn't notice four gringos hitting a courier in the middle of nowhere. It sounded insane. It also sounded final. We drove south a week later, under a moon that felt too bright. Vincent had the plan mapped down to the minute. A heavy chain hidden across a dirt road. Elevated positions dug into a low rise. Disable the engines. Control the drivers. Take the cargo and disappear. That was the version he sold us. At dawn, the trucks came exactly when he said they would. TJ yanked the chain tight as the lead vehicle crested the bend. The brakes screamed. Dust exploded around us. I expected warning shots at the engine blocks. Vincent didn't wait. He stood up from his position and fired straight through the windshield of the first truck. No hesitation. No commands. Just controlled, deliberate shots into the driver's side. The second truck returned fire, but Jod cut that short in seconds. When it was over, the only sounds left were the ticking of hot engines, and something else I couldn't place at first. Then I heard it clearly. A child crying. The turning point, the sound came from the cab of the lead truck. TJ reached it first. He pulled open the passenger door and just froze. I stepped up beside him and saw two kids wedged between the seats and the back wall. Small. Too small to understand what they were looking at. Vincent climbed up behind us, calm as ever. He started speaking to them in Spanish, soft and measured, like he was trying to settle a pair of skittish animals. TJ snapped at him, asked what he thought he was doing. Keeping them still, Vincent said. TJ said we'd take them somewhere safe once we crossed back. A gas station. A clinic. Anywhere. Vincent didn't argue. He just nodded and told us to get the money loaded. I was halfway back to our truck with a duffel over my shoulder when the first shot rang out, then the second. They were close together. Efficient. I dropped the bag and ran back up the rise. The kids were slumped against each other in the passenger seat, blood darkening the upholstery. Vincent stood there with his pistol still raised. TJ didn't hesitate. He rushed him, screaming in a way I'd never heard before. Vincent shoved him back, weapon still in hand, explaining about loose ends and risk. TJ drew his own gun and fired before Vincent finished the sentence. 4 shots to the back, 1 more to the head after he hit the dirt. Nobody spoke after that. We grabbed the money and drove. Revenge for a few weeks, it felt like we'd gotten away with it. We split the money evenly and scattered to New Orleans, jot up toward Oklahoma, me staying quiet with a girl who thought I'd finally decided to live straight. Then TJ called. Said he was back in town and wanted to grab a burger, talk about the future like normal men with normal plans. When I showed up at his place that evening, his truck was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. The back door wasn't locked. It never was. I knew something was wrong the second I stepped inside. The smell was heavy and metallic. I found him upstairs in the bathtub. Whoever did it had taken their time. Fingers gone. Skin carved away in strips. It wasn't just murder. It was a message. I drove straight to Jod. He was already dead. Police tape wrapped around a motel door he'd checked into under a false name. Witnesses told reporters about a tall man with long hair and a thick beard leaving fast. They mentioned bandages around his head. Vincent had taken 5 rounds at close range. Either he survived, or someone wanted us to think he had. I left Texas that night with my share of the money and never looked back. Some debts don't stay buried. Story 4. December 1991. My name's Charlene. And in December of 1991, I was working at a small retail shop in a strip mall in North Austin. It wasn't glamorous work stocking shelves, running the register, sweeping up at closing, but it paid my rent and kept my routine steady. Saturdays were usually slow in the mornings. A few regulars, parents dragging kids from store to store. Two doors down from us was a place called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. I'd stop in there sometimes after work when the heat got unbearable, which in Austin is most of the year. That Saturday, I pulled into the lot just after 8 and noticed flashing lights reflecting off the storefront windows. Police cruisers were parked at odd angles in front of the yogurt shop. A fire truck sat off to the side. The front door was blackened around the frame, like smoke had curled out and stained it. An officer stood near the entrance. I asked if everything was all right. He gave me a polite nod and said it was under control, nothing I need to worry about. But his eyes told a different story. I opened my store, went through my morning routine, and tried not to think about the scorch marks next door. That night, I turned on the news. The evening news, confirmed what the police wouldn't say that morning. A fire had broken out inside the yogurt shop sometime after closing. Firefighters responded, forced entry, and once the smoke cleared, they found 4 girls on the floor. Sarah Harbison was 15. Her sister Jennifer was 17. Eliza Thomas was 17 too. In the back room was 13-year-old Amy Ayers. All of them had been shot. The fire hadn't killed them. It had been set after. I remember sitting on the couch with my plate untouched in my lap, listening to their names read out like they were being called for attendance. The next day, the strip mall was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. People moved slower. Parents held their kids' hands tighter. Churches filled up for prayer services. There were candlelight vigils in the parking lot within a week. It wasn't just grief, it was anger. We wanted someone to point at, someone to blame, something to make it feel contained. Rumors moved faster than facts. When police detained a teenage boy carrying a similar caliber weapon, word spread before confirmation ever came. People were ready to hang him in the court of public opinion. When he was cleared, it felt like the ground shifted again. We were back to not knowing. And not knowing was worse. The confessions years passed without an arrest, and the case became something people whispered about instead of shouted. Then a new lead detective took over and reopened old doors. The same group of teenage boys who'd once been questioned and cleared were brought back in for fresh interviews. By then, they were in their 20s, trying to build adult lives on top of something that had never fully left them. What we were told at the time was simple. New information, new strategy. What we didn't see were the hours behind closed doors. 2 of those men, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, eventually confessed. The details that surfaced through media reports sounded rehearsed and inconsistent, but they were confessions all the same. The state moved quickly. Charges were filed. Trials followed. Both were convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. For many of us in Austin, it felt like resolution. Not relief exactly, but something close enough to hold on to. We told ourselves justice had simply taken its time. Then, years later, the convictions were overturned. Appellate courts cited improper procedures during interrogation. There were questions about how the statements had been obtained, about the pressure applied, about whether those confessions had been shaped rather than freely given. When DNA testing advanced enough to re-examine evidence from the scene, it excluded them entirely. No biological link, no forensic tie, just words spoken in a room without cameras. The ground shifted again. This time, it wasn't just about a killer still out there. It was about whether we trusted the wrong version of the truth. DNA breakthrough. By the time advanced DNA testing became routine, most of us had learned not to expect answers. The yogurt shop case felt frozen in time, preserved in newspaper clippings and anniversaries. Then in late 2021, the department announced it was reopening the investigation with new technology. They had preserved biological material from the scene all those years, and now there was a chance to run it against expanded databases. When the update finally came, it was delivered with careful wording. The DNA profile from the shop matched a man named Robert Brashers. He'd been linked to other violent crimes decades earlier. He died in a shootout with police in 1999. The announcement landed quietly. There was no dramatic arrest, no courtroom, no public reckoning. Just a name attached to a file that had been open for 30 years. Investigators went a step further. They retrieved the firearm Brashers had used during that final confrontation and test-fired it. Ballistics compared to shell casings recovered from the yogurt shop showed a match. Technically, that was closure. The case was marked solved. But when a man has been dead for over 2 decades, justice feels abstract. There's no apology, no explanation, no trial for families to sit through and measure. Just confirmation that what happened was real and that the person responsible never had to answer for it in a courtroom. Hope and unease after the announcement, the conversation shifted again. Not just toward the man whose DNA had closed the file, but toward the two who had once been convicted. Under Texas law, when someone is declared innocent after wrongful imprisonment, the state compensates them for every year they lost. $80,000 per year, the article said. I tried to imagine what a decade of your life is worth on paper. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott had entered prison as young men and left older. Carrying something that money can't measure, their lawyers spoke about restitution, about clearing records, about rebuilding. That word rebuilding has followed this story from the beginning. The yogurt shop was torn down years ago. The strip mall changed hands. New businesses moved in. On the surface, everything looks normal again. But every December, people still light candles. We remember the girls' names. We remember the fire. We remember how quickly anger turned into certainty and how certainty dissolved into doubt. The case is technically closed now. There's a name attached to it, evidence logged, reports finalized, and yet something about it still feels unfinished. Maybe it's because no one stood in a courtroom and answered for those 4 lives. Maybe it's because some damage can't be undone, even when the truth finally surfaces. Some stories end. Others just stop being updated.